In 1933, an Englishman was in a hotel in Peiping when he was told that a delegation from the newly declared Turkic Islamic Republic of East Turkestan wanted to speak to him. In a brief meeting, the Englishman, a Muslim convert whose family was known for owning a pickle company, accepted their offer to become king of their new kingdom, which he renamed Islamestan. China was just recovering from the difficult period called the Warlord Era, and in faraway Xinjiang, rebellion and geopolitics and chaos were swirling. And suddenly the world wanted to know, who was this Khalid Sheldrake, the supposed new Pickle King of Islamistan? It is history that deserves to be remembered. Born Bertram William Sheldrake in 1888, Sheldrake was the son of William Sheldrake and grandson of Gosling Molander Sheldrake, a condiment manufacturer who ran G. Sheldrake, manufacturer of pickles, sauces, chutney, ketchup, vinegar, etc., bottlers of capers, curries, and other condiments, in Dulwich in southeast London. And the company later changed its name to Sheldrake's Pickles. The company was at least moderately successful, allowing Bertie to get an education. Although he was raised in the Church of England, at 15 he converted to Islam, then usually called Mohammedanism, learned Arabic, and changed his name to Khalid, meaning eternal, everlasting, and immortal. According to the Dulwich Society, Sheldrake was drawn to Islam after two of his friends, one agnostic and the other Catholic, led him to question his faith. He studied Islam and was officially accepted into the faith in 1904. Islam was not unknown in England, although European converts were rare. The first English convert to Islam directly referred to by name was John Nelson in the 16th century. Sheldrake, who worked in the family business, had plenty of free time to devote to his missionary work. In 1905, he became the honorary assistant secretary and later the honorary vice president of the Pan-Islamic Society of London. In 1906, at 18, he founded the Young England Islamic Society. As he became more involved with the English Muslim community, he became estranged from his family and transitioned from working for the Pickle Company to journalism. In 1912, he said that he was at variance with my nearest and dearest. He founded various journalistic endeavors, included the Minaret, a monthly magazine, a journal called Britain and India, and the Muslim News Journal. His articles were controversial and brought him notoriety. In one, he argued that Napoleon had considered conversion to Islam. He worked with the Working Muslim Mission, but eventually left to establish his own group, the Western Islamic Association. Before World War I, Sheldrake served as a territorial, a volunteer force created in 1908 that would serve as a home guard if the regular army was engaged in a war elsewhere. When the First World War broke out, he enlisted with several fellow converts, but they were not sent overseas as they were not trusted. One of his friends, Frank Mohammed Crabtree, was called morally and politically undesirable and an English Mohammedan crank. Sheldrake addressed a letter to King George V, asking him to intervene and put a stop to anti-Muslim comics and articles in newspapers when Muslims were giving all in your service, referring to hundreds of thousands of Indian Muslims fighting in the British Army. Sheldrake's outreach efforts and work quickly made him one of the leading Muslim adherents in England. In 1917, he married Victoria Catherine Sybil Gilbert, who converted to Islam and changed her name to Ghazia. In 1915, he was granted an honorary degree from the Paris Society of Philology, Science, and Fine Arts, and was also reported to receive an honorary doctorate in literature from the country of Ecuador. In the 1920s, he began a rise which made him famous across the world, especially in Muslim circles. The Western Islamic Association had 7 million members globally by the 1930s. Sheldrake was also fluent in Esperanto and believed in the language's power to break down the barriers of color, creed, and caste. So much so that he translated the Quran into it. Several excerpts were published in the Islamic Review as early as 1914. He converted part of his house into a mosque in Peckham and may have helped to raise funds for the first purpose-built mosque in London, located in Southfields. He had 2 children, both boys, in the 1920s, and their house was visited by Muslim clerics whose turbans provided some interest in the neighborhood. In 1928, he gained further fame when he conducted the funeral of Sayyid Ali, a famous elephant keeper at the London Zoo who had been murdered. He was frequently mentioned in newspapers, although inaccurately. He was called the Sheikh of British Muslims, though no such official title ever existed, and was identified as an Irish-French noble who gave up his title to convert, although his family was from Suffolk. Rumors persisted that he had converted in order to marry multiple wives. However, he only ever married once, and in 1926 told a reporter that polygamy in Islam was fast disappearing as an institution. Sheldrake was also responsible for some high-profile conversions. In 1932, he performed a conversion aboard a 42-seater airplane for Gladys Milton Palmer, daughter of Sir Walter Palmer of the Huntley and Palmer Biscuit Empire, and whose husband was the Protestant son of the White Rajah of Sarawak on the island of Borneo. Palmer insisted she wanted her conversion to be performed on no earthly territory. Sheldrake traveled widely, speaking about Islam in the UK and abroad, with his travel usually covered by the communities who invited him. Halfway across the world, events were unfolding in China that would soon have a profound impact on Sheldrake. In 1916, Yuan Shikai died. Yuan had been the de facto leader of China since 1911, after a revolution overthrew the Qing dynasty. His death brought chaos as various warlords and leaders battled for control, leading to what is called the Warlord era. Much of the fighting was done in the east, while the sparsely populated and distant western territory of Xinjiang acted essentially independently. China also faced foreign incursion from both the still young Soviet Russia, which was eager to advance into Central Asia, and Japan, which threatened from the east. The United Kingdom was involved as well, desperate to protect the British Raj from the encroaching communists. The warlord era largely came to an end by 1928 after Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang united the eastern provinces, but problems persisted, especially in Xinjiang. In 1931, Xinjiang had been rocked by the Kumo rebellion by the Kumo Khanate, which had been semi-autonomous until 1930. The situation was complex, and Kai-shek quietly supported the rebellion as it sought to oust Yun Shiren, the governor of Xinjiang, who he saw as too pro-Soviet. At nearly the same time, a second rebellion began further south, with an entirely different group of rebels seeking their own independence. The second rebellion was led by Muslim Uyghurs and ethnic Kyrgyz. They wanted complete independence and declared a state called the Turkic Republic of Eastern Turkestan, or the Republic of Uyghustan, on November 12, 1933. Centered on Kashgar, historians generally refer to the state as the First Republic of East Turkestan. The republic claimed significant territory, but was incredibly fragile. Sheldrake may have been first approached by members of the fledgling republic while he was still in England. He told British diplomats that he had been in contact with Chinese Muslim generals in 1933, who had sought advice on what political stance they should adopt in the chaos engulfing the region. Some sources claim he was offered the throne while still in England, although that is unclear. What is certain is that in 1933, Sheldrake embarked on a global speaking tour with stops in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Shanghai. In August, Sheldrake was in then called Peiping at a hotel. While sitting in the lounge, his assistant told him that a delegation from Turkestan wished to speak to him. Sheldrake retired to his room, where the delegation entered, knelt and kissed his hand. They claimed that Turkestan had declared itself an independent kingdom, but that it needed a king, and that they would make an oath to serve him if he would accept the position. They also asked him to propose a name for the new country, and Sheldrake suggested Islamestan. The party then told him of the uncertain nature of the situation, including telling him that he should probably avoid actually going to Turkestan, as the risk of assassination was too high. I had the choice of becoming a monarch or refusing these earnest and poor people, Sheldrake said, who might lose heart and become desperate, or fall the prey of some political adventurer. He gave his assent, and he was acclaimed His Majesty King Khalid of Islamistan. Although Sheldrake did contact the British Embassy in Peiping at the time, he made no mention of the meeting. He arrived in Japan on September 8th, and a week later wrote a letter to the Japan Times and Mail, which said he was approached to become the ruler of this new Muslim state on the borders of Turkestan. I have not yet fully decided, as I wish to come to Japan and meet my brethren here. He visited Hong Kong and the Philippines in October. The South China Morning Post wrote in March of 1934 that Sheldrake had told their reporter about his kingship, but swore them to the strictest secrecy. In the Philippines, they reported about it openly, claiming he meant to ask the League of Nations for recognition. When he arrived on Java, then part of the Dutch East Indies, he attracted official attention, first from the Dutch and then the British. According to The Suburban King of Tartary, which appeared in the journal Asian Affairs in 1990, the British Consul General in Jakarta thought Sheldrake was a nobody and possibly mentally subnormal, while the Dutch thought he was mostly interested in raising money. The Consul General wrote that, with rumors concerning the throne of Xinjiang, if that unhappy Chinese province can be said to have a throne to market, his travels and pretensions can scarcely fail to arouse the suspicion that he is more or less an adventurer. Events in Xinjiang continued apace. A British representative expressed optimism about the potential new state, but British authorities were firm that they recognized the government in Nanjing. On February 13th, 1934, the Chinese pressed the British, asking about an allegation that a British agent was assisting the rebels. German diplomats were also seeking information from the British about New Turkestan, which they seemed to think was connected to the British. No country offered official recognition. On March 8th, Sheldrake visited the British consulate in Bangkok. He was drawing considerable attention from the Muslim community and still giving lectures. The only thing the consulate found particularly interesting, however, was that Sheldrake said nothing at all about his kingship. Copies of the report were sent throughout Asia, and he was still expected to visit India, Afghanistan, Persia, Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, and the Balkans, and Eastern Europe, and had supposedly received invitations from Ibn Saud, King of Arabia, President Ataturk in Turkey, and Benito Mussolini. It took longer for the news to reach England. On March 11th, the Sunday Express reported, "Londoner becomes king," including an interview with Gazia. Gazia told the newspaper that Sheldrake was already making plans for the country, hoping to modernize it rapidly and encourage British engineers to come assist. Gazia said of their two sons, "The princes of Forest Hill were greatly excited that she would take my responsibilities as a queen seriously." Newspapers offered a variety of comical titles: "The Pickle King of Tartary," "The English Emir of Kashgar," and wrote that he was heading into 57 varieties of trouble, and that he had deserted the ancestral pickle vats. The New York Times picked up the story on March 13th, and it was reported all over the U.S. The Soviets made much of the story, pushing the narrative that British India intended to create puppet states in China as part of an anti-communist campaign. Other rumors suggested it was a ploy to steal the region's valuable jade deposits. The House of Commons began questioning the Foreign Secretary about the situation, and all the Foreign Secretary would say was that "I have no information as to any British subject having received an invitation to be King of Xinjiang, but inquiries are being made of His Majesty's Consul General at Kashgar as to the origin of the report." In April, Sheldrake was interviewed by the Times of India in Hyderabad. While he admitted to being approached by certain powers, he claimed he meant to remain an absent king for the time being. In Kashgar, a British employee at the consulate was killed, and the consul general's wife was shot through the lung, leading the British to demand explanations from the Chinese. Soviet propaganda continued to claim that Sheldrake was part of an official British intrigue, but in reality, a pro-Soviet Xinjiang governor was quickly putting down the unrest with the help of Red Army units. In fact, all of the talk and concern meant very little. The government of East Turkestan had fled from Kashgar on February 6th, and by April, armed resistance had been stamped out in a series of lopsided battles. The government of India believed he was still in India as late as May 17th. In August of 1934, the British press agency in Shanghai reported that Sheldrake had fled Turkestan after rebel forces collapsed, but added that there was some mystery about Dr. Sheldrake's whereabouts. Numerous modern articles suggest that he set out for Xinjiang shortly after being approached in Peiping, but interviews and government reports prove he traveled throughout Asia in the fall and arrived in India in April 1934. Contrary to some reports, there's little evidence that his wife ever left England. Sheldrake quietly returned home. And so, for a brief and very odd moment, a relatively unknown Englishman set the world of international diplomacy on its ear as governments around the world wanted to know who was this converted son of a pickle manufacturer. But was it even real, or did he just make it up in order to draw attention to his travels? If there was a delegation, who were they and what were they really offering? Because no one in the government of East Turkestan, as briefly as it existed, seems to have ever spoken about or even known about the offer. Newspapers at the time are full of chaos and propaganda and don't offer any real answers. Perhaps it was an attempt by the new government to get the English to support them, but no such offer seems to have been made to the British government. Sheldrake himself seems to have been quickly forgotten around the world, including even in East Turkestan. He passed away in England in 1947. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop, book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.